is the definition of product market fit. Making solar sexy, making it like a super delightful experience. This really changes the way that customers think about getting a solar panel system. Asian consumers are all very cost conscious. I feel like I am at my ikigai.
Welcome to the Climate Hero Club podcast. At the Climate Hero Club, we're on a mission to champion the bold innovators behind climate tech, spotlighting the stories, challenges, and breakthroughs shaping a more sustainable future. I'm your host, Ollie, and here today we have a very special guest. Thank you, Bolong, for joining us.
Hi, Ollie. Thanks for having me.
So, as a quick intro, Bolong is an NTU grad, an ex-consultant, a venture builder, worked to build an NG factory, raised capital from reputable names like Earth Venture, Undivided Ventures, and angel investors like David Pardo. Please introduce yourself.
Well, thanks for the introduction, Ollie. Well, my name is Bolong. I'm one of the co-founders of GetSolar. I really started out my career in the past in management consulting. Before then, thereafter, working with startups to do market expansion across Asia. And finally, figured my way into the climate space about 5 years ago, when I got really extremely excited about rooftop solar and have been building within the space since.
Fantastic. And as I understand, you started with a slightly different angle when you started the business, something to do with AI as well. And then that kind of shifted over time. Can you share that experience?
Yeah, for sure. I think most may not know this, but when we first started out the company, we branded ourselves as Solar AI Technologies. At that point in time, I think when we first started looking at rooftop solar as a problem, but one of the things which became extremely clear is, despite the fact that the unit cost of solar is already much lower than electricity prices across Southeast Asia as a region, penetration was still extremely low, right? But being incubated out of Engie, which is a French Fortune 500 energy company, the initial lens that we took in looking at the problem was really about the fact that solar companies find it extremely difficult to prospect customers, especially when trust and awareness is low. So there's very little kind of inbound interest of customers inquiring about solar. And 5 years ago, most solar companies really needed to actively outreach to customers. So in that span of maybe the first year of building the business, we built computer vision models on satellite imagery to be able to predict rooftop outlines, predict the solar potential of different rooftops. And then thereafter also combine a lot of real estate related information, like lease terms or who are the companies owning or occupying the buildings to create a search engine in a way, right, for solar companies to really prospect and identify which are the most feasible rooftops out there to start reaching out to.
Very cool. And so that transition into the current business model, right? Could you share what that business model is?
Yeah, so I think generally in hindsight, everything becomes much clearer, right? When we first started out with that kind of approach, ultimately, one of the things that we realized quite early on, maybe 6-9 months into building, is that it is really like a B2B solution focused on a very limited set of potential customers, right? In Singapore or in the region, at a point in time in Singapore, there might be about 15-20 solar companies at most. And so naturally then, when we were engaging in conversations with a lot of these companies, we started realizing that the need that they had was not just in identifying the most feasible prospects, right, but ultimately really in closing the deal and getting solar installed for customers. That process is still extremely transactional. Solar system providers, from a customer experience standpoint as well, we realized still, similarly had that lack of trust and awareness. And it was because of all of these issues and problems that we identified that in mid-2020 launched, really pioneered the rent-to-own solar model for homeowners as well as small businesses in Southeast Asia. In the rent-to-own model, the value proposition is quite simple, right? It's a no upfront cost model. On a monthly basis, we essentially charge customers a flat monthly fee for solar ownership over a 5 to 10 years period, during which we fully cover all repairs, maintenance, give customers a performance guarantee on their systems, and ultimately allow them to ease into rooftop solar ownership over the 5 or 10 years. Now, if we contrast that to that, big trust and awareness problem that we face, and the traditional experience at that point in time was really for homeowner, for instance, right? Okay, a solar installer might go to a homeowner, pitch them and say, pay me $20,000 right? After about 7, 8 years, you would break even on your solar system. And then, oh, don't worry, thereafter, you get free solar for an extra 20 years because, the panels are warranted for such a long period of time. But when trust and awareness is very low, most customers will find that it's still an extremely long time frame to wait 6, 7, 8 years to break even, right? This kind of rent-to-own models was built to really allow instant break-even to customers now. Right, our average customer in Singapore would pay us about $200 on a monthly basis over a 5 or 10 year period. Typically, once the solar system is installed, they're already saving about $300. Right now, it's no upfront cost, $100 of extra cash every month. And we find that this really changes the way that customers think about getting a solar panel system on their roof.
You briefly mentioned before that you switched business models. I think a lot of the other founders that might be listening to this would be interested to hear, now that you found a very strong product market fit, what it was like pivoting. What was your experience and your journey in deciding, okay, this idea that we had, this vision that we had has to shift now? And when did you feel comfortable saying, okay, well, this new idea is actually fitting and we're going to stick to it?
I think in hindsight, we realized a lot of things, right? I think one of the biggest lessons was really, a lot of consultants maybe might think about like, okay, what is the framework or what is the definition of product market fit, right? Ultimately, in hindsight, in my opinion, is really just, okay, how easily are you able to convert customers or, prospects into paying customers, right? When we first started out with that data science, B2B focused play, oddly enough, after 6 to 9 months of, working on that model, getting a lot of feedback and interest from a lot of different solar companies, right, NG included, we ultimately converted only like Total, NG's competitor globally across the world. But as we started to shift to rent to own and started putting plans out in front of customers, the initial adoption when we are putting rent to own plans, even as a side-by-side comparison to upfront purchase, but I think one of the really interesting anecdotes is most of our customers on a rent to own plan are paying for a 5 year plan generally around a 30 to 40% price premium, right? For a 10 year plan, typically across the 10 years, close to 100% price premium, right? And Asian consumers are all very cost conscious. Every one of our customers are doing that mental math of like, okay, taking $200, multiplying by 120 months, right? But despite this, when we went to market with the plans in initial testing, 90% of customers will say, okay, I want the rent to own offers. And for us, I mean, that's a very clear indicator, right? That kind of price premiums that they're paying is really associated to the fact that now they feel like, okay, there's a solar system which, I don't have to worry about. GetSolar is gonna fully take care of it for me. And like that was a very good indicator for us.
Fantastic. And it seems that you've figured out how to make that happen for your clients. Is there anything else you can share about the innovative financing methods that you've utilized in order to enable this?
Yep. So in the early phases of really building and launching these kinds of, rent to own model for the residential solar systems in Southeast Asia, right, it was still extremely new at that point in time. Instead, a lot of the folks that I knew who were extremely experienced in the rooftop solar industry, partners, mentors for me, would sometimes tell me in mid 2022, they'll tell me, hey, Paul, I don't recommend you to do this, right? Because the residential customers in Singapore, of which are really landed homeowners, the top 5-10% of income band in Singapore, a lot of them will tell me, these customers don't need financing, right? So you can launch these kinds of financing plans, but the take up is going to be extremely low. And it was, really kind of just through that engagement with customers, which allowed us to firstly realize that there was that, big demand for someone to provide a fully serviced offering. But then thereafter, really also setting up some kind of scalable financing structures to be able to grow all of these portfolios over time. I wouldn't get, too much into details here, but essentially in enabling the first sets of projects, we actually partnered very closely with project financiers in the market who traditionally have already been financing solar systems just at the extremely large scale to create ring-fence portfolios where now they deploy capital. We almost manage the entire fund vehicle as a managing agent to give them even higher returns, which during that period of time also allows us to go and de-risk and prove out the fact that we are able to execute on solar projects well, to prove out the fact that operationally the cost of running solar systems is going to be low, in the longer term. And then lastly, also, that we're able to provide even outsized returns, right, for our project financiers or for the partners that we're working with.
From my understanding, the solar space is quite competitive. Many players that are operating in this space. How has that affected your choices? How has that affected your growth over the period since you've started?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think the rooftop solar landscape in Southeast Asia as a region is still extremely nascent at this point in time, right? But I think the really interesting thing that is that it's growing quite rapidly. You start to see, new kind of innovative type financing models, new go-to-market, channels where solar companies are exploring. But ultimately, if you take a step back and you look at kind of rooftop solar penetration within the residential segment in Southeast Asia, it's still like less than 1 or 2% at this point in time. So there's still a lot of room for the industry to kind of grow together. And of course, ultimately, a lot of it boils down to execution as well. And so we're also extremely conscious in building and operating the company, firstly, to make sure that, as we spoke about, right, we have a very scalable type of financing structures over time, but then really also drive and build up kind of the supporting tech stack to allow us to acquire projects at extremely low costs, to allow us to service customers at extremely low costs, which would then consequently either improve our margins as a company or also be able to put out better and better kind of price offers out there to the market, to customers.
So essentially, the initial idea you had is actually not benefiting you in your current operations. So the technology you built when you were more focusing on the software is actually part of your operating system now, right?
Definitely. I mean, and it's also the way that we think about, or kind of embedded in the way that we think about, what needs to transform within the solar industry. In our opinion, the solar industry traditionally have always operated like the construction industry. So people are paying upfront for systems. You have a solar contractor who comes in, you are often making a choice based on price. They come in, they install the solar system, and thereafter they're completely out of the picture. Right. Naturally, the incentive alignment is, a bit lower because solar contractors want to, maximize their revenue. They want to maximize their profit margin. But solar systems are ultimately a long-term investment, right? It's going to be on your roof for 25 years. For us as a company, we are a lot about, transforming the way that people feel about solar. We talk internally a lot about, making solar sexy, making it like a super delightful experience, making it sound like an experience that over 5, 10, 20 years, you have someone there to go and sort out, the worries, the problems related to your solar system. And a lot of that is really only made possible because we have that tech, right, to streamline a lot of these operations and build a much more delightful customer experience.
So you talked about the tech, you talked about the financing, and you talked about the way of selling that all have needed to change in order to grow your business. GetSolar is growing quite quickly in a short time. What's been the way for you to build trust with your clients?
So I think in every market, our operating approach is always to try and get integrated with the market as quickly as possible. Right. Late last year, we expanded into Malaysia. The first couple of months, I was maybe spending about 3/4 of my time in Malaysia, right? Really just making sure that we work and select the right partners with kind of the quality of, their workmanship, making sure that we standardize in terms of processes, the equipment, quality controls processes that we have, right? And then thereafter, over time, it's really, first starting from building relationships with customers and then proving out and earning their trust, right? As a new player in the market, I think maybe our first set of customers might sometimes look at our track record or portfolio in Singapore to say, okay, oh, maybe, you came from Singapore, you're a Singapore brand. I believe, you'll be solid, right? Look at our Singapore-based customer reviews. But then these days in Malaysia, we're also starting to build up our own presence. But this is not just a short-term thing. It's something that we need to continuously do over the next decade, 2 decades, 3 decades.
And how do you choose what markets to enter? And what are the biggest challenges you face when entering them?
Yeah, for us, in terms of maybe generic frameworks or calculus, it's always like, okay, within a market, what is their addressable market and how big is the need for the product? Localizing it to our business model specifically, right, which is a rent-to-own type solar system. Oftentimes, we'll look at, firstly, within the market, if electricity prices are high, right, and the cost of building rooftop solar systems is lower, meaning compounded into the unit cost of solar, If that economics or that difference is strong, then it makes even more sense for a customer to say, okay, I want to go ahead with solar and net them very attractive returns. Beyond that, then of course, as a company, as a rooftop solar company, we'll then also have to look at kind of the maturity of the ecosystem in terms of solar installers that we can land into the market and partner with, as well as regulations, right? Whether or not in certain markets, in Southeast Asia, for instance, sometimes Indonesia is a little bit more tricky as a market for solar. If there may be artificial barriers in place for you to get solar systems live, right? But else, in my opinion, I mean, I have very strong conviction over this kind of unit economics for solar compared to electricity prices at this point in time across the region already makes sense, right? So even just leaning on free market mechanisms, you would expect that at a point in time, you would see solar panels on every rooftop, right? Just as broadband is in every home at this point in time.
You see, once you've shown that to your potential clients, it seems like a no-brainer, but you still need to get in front of them. You still need to get in touch with them. And so is that what you do through the local partners that you have, or do you do your own direct marketing?
We do our own direct marketing and sales, right? So at this point in time in the markets that we enter into, it's 100% inbound. Typically, some of our initial go-to-market is really building up our organic search. Currently on our site, we bring in about 20,000 monthly visitors across Southeast Asia, right? Not just Singapore, Malaysia. Over time, we're also building up presence in our future markets. So that's always the first kind of go-to-market, right? We just localize content, bring in web traffic, turn on our solar calculator on the website to allow customers to get instant, quote comparisons. And then thereafter, over time, stack on more and more channels.
So it seems like people are already aware of it and already looking for it. So obviously that's a great position to be in. What got you to get into solar as an industry?
Well, I think this maybe stems out more from like a kind of a personal standpoint, right? When I was growing up in Singapore, I mean, most of us would spend 2 years in national service in the army. I recall at that point in time, sometimes late at night in the jungle, in the trenches, I would then think also about philosophical questions about like what's the meaning of life. And at a point in time, then really clarified that if there is only one thing in the world, right, or in life that I could have, and if I don't have anything else, right, is there a single outcome wherein I can feel like, okay, it was a life well lived? And the only kind of permutation or conclusion I got to was like, okay, the impact. If I can go on to very strongly impact like 10 people, who can then go on to impact 10 people each in a very significant manner, right, meaning there's impact, there's scale, then, I could be extremely poor, alone, somewhere in random Southeast Asia and like on my deathbed, and I'll still look back like, okay, that's a life well lived. And since then, that's shaped a lot of, how I thought about my career, moving into management consulting, to really learn strategy and how to break down, big complex issues into the fundamentals, right? To make sure that we're always addressing the fundamental problem, to move into startups, and when it comes to climate change, it was really a realization maybe about 7 or 8 years ago that actually people at the bottom of the pyramid, right, are most impacted by climate change. At that point in time, climate was also a topic which was a lot more underserved, right? I mean, there were a lot less, NGOs, there were a lot less organizations looking at it as a problem. That's an opportunity to really try and maximize impact.
And you're speaking about consulting and unit economics. What from those consulting days have really helped you in building your own business? And also, how do you decide what's worth building based on sort of maybe the unit economics or other decision factors?
Yeah, in hindsight, like in consulting, not too sure how much there is, frankly, because actually from moving from consulting into startups, like I had to unlearn a lot of things as well, right? In making sure that you roll up your sleeves and be hands-on and execution focused versus sometimes really just thinking from a strategic lens. But I partially joke because lessons that I took away from consulting, I was also at a point in time inspired by what Elon Musk said about like, okay, if you want to maximize impact, you need to be able to dissect everything down by first principles, right? Make sure that you're focusing on solving the right problems at the core and the fundamentals. It's really allowed me to build up that kind of framework and think and thought processes, which these days, I mean, from a kind of problem solving standpoint, I rely on a lot, right? To make sure that we are not tackling symptoms that we see on the surface, but really then further asking ourselves why and drilling it down into that root cause and then really diagnosing and addressing that.
What keeps you going when the days get tough?
Yeah, I think in every startup founder's journey, there's always like a whole ton of ups and downs. Right. I tell a lot of my friends these, but I feel really grateful because ultimately at this point in time, I feel like I am at, my ikigai, right? The Japanese concept of being at the intersection of where you feel like you can add value to what, aligns to your core, what, makes you at least a survivable living. And in the worst of the days of which we've had many across the last 5 years, I would then at least wake up and say, okay, today, we've built one new solar system, right? There's some, environmental impact there. We are reducing carbon emissions in the world, I think at least incrementally, even if sometimes things are extremely tough, I think that really keeps me going.
And thinking about it, it's like, the cost of producing solar panels and the end of life of solar panels, because there's a lot more to it than just the energy that's produced, as opposed to the energy that's taken from the grid, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So as a company, also, we do have quite a few impact investors on our cap table. So we do impact reporting. We do assess, from the panel manufacturers, the inverter manufacturers that we are procuring from, if, they are already trying their best to try and, optimize manufacturing processes. As a company, while all our solar systems at this point in time are 2-3 years old, we haven't had to get them through the end of life cycle yet. But we're also then in conversations, with some of the emerging recycling startups in the space, right, to make sure that we have a game plan for what to do with our solar systems at the end of it. But ultimately, I think beyond all of the numbers, then it's also just making sure that from a day-to-day perspective, in terms of, truly living the value, making sure that not just from an environmental perspective, that all our team members understand the importance of it, and, be it for health and safety as well, we make sure that all these processes are kind of a part of the company culture, a part of the value system.
And looking forward, what excites you most about the next 5 years in climate tech?
I think one of the most interesting things with climate tech at this point in time, right, especially, given that I've went into the space 5 years ago, which feels like maybe like quite a hold in terms of that climate tech time span in Singapore, is that there are a lot more climate technology which are really past their inflection point, right? In terms of not just the environmental impact, but more importantly, that they are now fundamentally better solutions, they are cheaper solutions. And in a market like Southeast Asia, I think that's extremely important to try and drive adoption. And the next things you need is really just business model innovation, kind of put it in front of all consumers, be it B2C or B2B. And I think that this existing wave of startups, founders, are going to play an extremely important role in driving that forward, right? Especially for the region.
And what's next for GetSolar?
So we're continuously trying to drive our footprint, right? Increase the number of customers, B2C as well as B2B that we are serving for rooftop solar systems. But I think one of the really interesting things is also at a point in time or quite quickly, where we're also starting to go and bundle up EV chargers, home storage solutions to be able to not just help a customer increase the environmental impact, right, but also really create much higher net savings in terms of how they generate energy, how they use energy, and how they even, export energy in some cases.
On a personal note, what is the impact you hope to create in the world?
I don't think I ever really kind of specifically define it, but in my opinion, from time to time, I think this really changes. But tying back to what I mentioned, it's really just making sure that, when I'm whatever 70, 80, 90 on my deathbed, I look back during my time on Earth.
If you could go back in time and give yourself some advice when you're just starting out with your business, what would it be?
I think so. In the first couple of years of the business, I ran it as a solo founder, and I think there was a big part of which was also kind of feeling like, be it the perfectionist in me, be it maybe not having that confidence to involve more people earlier. But I think in hindsight, building up a team, solid, trusted team around me. At this point in time, with Luke, our co-founder, he's someone that I've known for more than a decade. I mean, we went to army together. Is extremely, extremely important. I mean, not just from the perspective of being able to scale the business, right? But also even just emotionally as a founder as well. Yeah, so that I think in building up like a solid inner circle team of people who I trust, I would likely have done that earlier rather than later.
And if people want to learn more about GetSolar, where should they go?
Yeah, so typically, I mean, we are active on most social media platforms, right? LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, just search GetSolar or GetSolar.ai. Yeah, apart from that, I think a lot of customers who are interested in solar would also then browse through our blog. We have a lot of content. We would maybe dare say we are maybe the most active like solar specific content site in Southeast Asia. And then for anyone who's interested in, getting a solar system on their roof in Singapore and Malaysia at this point in time, can also use our solar calculator on our website for like a quick instant assessment.
So to everyone out there, there's no excuse. Go check out GetSolar and get solar installed on your rooftop. So yeah, with that, I really want to thank you, Bolong, for sharing your story. It was really nice talking to you and hearing more about your background and your experience and where you're planning to go. Yeah, let's stay in touch and build this community and a better future together.
Awesome. Thanks, Ollie.
Thank you.